This is just a quick rundown of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go through the quick spiel about Media Current. Got to get the shameless plug in. Then we're going to talk about why we're here. And then I'm going to show you some pure CSS art. We're going to start with the simple stuff. We're going to move into things that are a little more complicated with the keyframes and text animations. And then I'm going to introduce you to Francine. She is somebody that I think most people have never seen, but she is absolutely the epitome of development art. So I think you're all really going to like her. Then we're going to talk a little bit about HTML canvas and JavaScript art. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. So a little bit about Media Current. We are a full-service digital agency that implements world-class open-source software development strategy and design. I'm not going to go through the rest of the spiel because this talk is very specifically not client-centered. So we're just going to skip that bit. I'm Claire. I'm a senior front-end developer. I am based in Austin, Texas. My Twitter handle is @developingclaire, and sometime in the next week I will post these slides, a link to the GitHub repo that's got all the code that you're going to see me run today, and probably also a slide with lots of really cool resources. So if you decide that you want to start making your own art, you can do that. So let's talk about why we're here. I was once told that the difference between a junior developer and a senior developer is that senior developers write less code. As professionals, we all want to write well-documented, well-formed, efficient code for our companies and our clients. But let's face it, none of us got into development because we wanted to write efficient code. We started doing this because it was fun, because we loved it, because we could be creative and interested in something. And I think a lot of us lose that the longer we do this job. So why are we here? This is Zack. This is Zack Hawkins. He's the head of front-end development at Media Current. I think a lot of people probably know Zack. If you don't, you should. He's a fabulous guy. I love him to death. But this is not the Zack that we are here for today. We are here for this Zack. This is the not amused face that Zack makes with me every time I write a piece of code that could be a little simpler. Every time I ask for a code review and somebody says, I don't even know what it is you're trying to do with this. This is the face he makes. And he tells me that I should not be writing clever code. So, since I don't get to do that for a living, I decided that I would do it as a session. Code can be complicated and elegant, creative and amusing, and we should never forget to play with our code. Now this bird is actually not moving. This is a PNG, and I'm using a keyframe to make it look like the bird is flying. This is the full file that makes that bird move. This is, like I said, incredibly simple stuff, but I think that a lot of people don't use keyframes because there are not an awful lot of places to use them in a production environment. But they're a great way to do animations, and they're incredibly simple, actually, to use. So we're going to start with some very basic CSS art. CSS art is created by placing, filling, sizing, and reshaping simple HTML elements on a page. And you can start with the very, very simple stuff. So this computer, along with its tower, its keyboard, and its mouse, were all created in one file. This is that file. This is everything that went into the HTML for that image. And that's all the styles that we had to create for that. And so this is it actually alive, and this one's got a couple of cute little hover effects in it. But that's kind of it. This is all hover effects, straight CSS. We're not doing any kind of animation. We're not doing any kind of keyframes. It's cute, but it's really kind of just cute. You can also do something much more complex. This image was also created with just HTML and CSS, the whole thing. There are no SVGs, there are no images, nothing. It's all shapes and colors. And actually, in the original file, the little paper airplanes move across the front, which I think is super cute. That one is only done with very basic transitions and animations. So this, again, just a straight flat CSS file, and you get something truly complicated. And I didn't make this one again. So anytime I didn't make it, I'll tell you who did, because it just doesn't seem fair not to. So what we're going to talk about first is the keyframes. And basically what keyframes do is they control the intermediate steps in CSS animations by defining waypoints along the way. So animations and transitions are fairly simple, but they generally go from one place to another, and you might do that in a set of milliseconds or just from top to bottom or whatever. With keyframes, you can set the animation to a specific set of time and place, so that you can take something that used to be fairly simple, moving from left to right in 0.6 seconds, and you can instead have it move along to create something a little more complicated. So with just a smidge more markup and some keyframes, we take the one bird we saw in that earlier slide, and we can turn it into this. And again, those birds, this is a terrible GIF, I apologize. Those birds are not actually moving. It's a GIF, and it's got 6 separate birds in it with separate wing placement. And basically what we're doing is we're moving a div box across the screen, and we're also moving the GIF behind an open window in the div so that it looks like it's flying. And the reason that this is great is because there is no video on this page. There is no JavaScript on this page. It's just a CSS file. So it's a whole lot smaller, a whole lot lighter, and it will continue to run appropriately even if your internet connection is crappy or if your JavaScript goes wonky, which, let's face it, happens to all of us. And so this is the basic CSS that we use for those birds. We have the 4 birds, and they each get their animation, duration, and delay so that we move them across the screen and get them to flap the way that we expect them to. And again, this is just the bird. It's just the one bird. So it's a fairly simple thing to put together. You can also do some deeply tacky things with keyframes. When I put this one together, this was not what I was trying to get it to do. But come on, that's just cool. This was a mistake that I made, but that's interesting, and it's just the keyframes, and all I'm really doing is animating that button, and we've got a little bit of box shadows going on. So again, some fairly simple stuff. You can do things that are a little more complicated. So again, this one is super duper tacky. But all of this, again, is being done with CSS and keyframes. We've actually created a span and repeated that span a couple of times, and we're just sort of bopping them around the page. So we bring all of that stuff together, the images and the keyframes, and you can make things like this. And once again, this entire thing is just CSS. This is just done with keyframes and animations. And I think that this is really neat. I'm especially proud of this one. I thought that one went really well. And the AI is feeling a bit off today. So thank you for your patience. But again, this is all it took. This is just the markup for that entire screen. There's just the one picture. It's a background image. I'm not going to show you the CSS file for this one because it's significantly larger than the ones that we've looked at so far. It's not any more complicated. There's just a whole lot more going on. And then there's Francine. Wow, this is going to be really short. And then there's Francine. So this is Francine, and that's an interesting piece of art, don't you think? That's a beautiful painting. There's some really good detail there. I love the shine on her skin. I'm gonna show you all of Francine here in a minute. This is all of Francine. Come on, darling, load for me. This is all of Francine, and there's and there you go. That kind of gives it away, but this is all of her, and I love this. The detail in this image is phenomenal. She's got wonderful eyebrows and shadows in her dress. The thing about Francine is that she's built using CSS, pure CSS. She was built by Diana Smith, and Ms. Smith only had 2 rules when she was creating Francine. All the HTML elements must be typed out by hand, and only an Atom text editor and Chrome Developer Tools was allowed when she was making it. I'm gonna share this repo with you so that you can see the code that goes into making Francine. You should know that you should probably look at it in Chrome. It works pretty well in Firefox. If you look at it in Internet Explorer, it goes a little cubist. But yeah, so there's that, and she does actually a couple of different things. She also did this one. This one is also done purely in HTML and CSS, using those same rules. So this is definitely the kind of thing that you can do. Before we go to Canvas, let's look at, so this is the text effect that we were looking at before. And I've got a couple of others. There's that one. And then there's this one, and I really like this one. This one does actually involve a little bit of JavaScript, but really only to set and then remove an active class so that we can pop all of our little letters around. But this one, again, is fairly simple. We wrote some of our own custom keyframes to pull this one off. And then we just call to them. Each of these letters is wrapped in a span. And then we just call to those letters to get them to do whatever it is we want them to do. The next thing that we're going to talk about is HTML Canvas. Canvas uses a mixture of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to do some very cool things. And I think Canvas is probably one of the things that we're going to see a whole lot more of moving into the future, because it's a much easier way to create images and to create interactive pieces of websites. So as soon as front-end developers stop being afraid of Canvas, it's going to end up being everywhere. Canvas is an API that is meant to draw graphics using JavaScript and the HTML5 Canvas element. And we're going to look at a couple of examples. And we're going to begin with the classic Canvas cloth. Now what the cloth is doing, and I'm going to show it to you in a second, it's basically a grid. And each of the lines in the grid is called a constraint because it's constraining its own little piece. And every point is called a mask. So this is a place that doesn't have any, it's not really there. It's just a point that you can reach out and touch and pull stuff around in. And the way that the JavaScript for this one works is if you pull 2 points apart, one point that is random and the point that you've chosen, they snap back together and it makes everything kind of move in an interesting way. Oops. And this is the HTML canvas. So it's fairly simple, right? It starts out just as a grid, just as a laying grid. And he's got this one, I've got this one set to be pretty loose so that it will just kind of wander around. But you can see that I've grabbed my point here, and I can pull my point around, and as soon as I let go, it all just sort of snaps back, and it follows the line from where it started to where it's supposed to go now. And there are lots of really cool examples of this online. Basically, just look up HTML Canvas examples, and you'll find all sorts of good stuff. But this I think, is probably a really great site. This image is not a video, it's not a GIF. This is built in Canvas. So it's moving, everything that you see moving is being programmatically moved with JavaScript. And this particular website, this is effectgames.com, there are lots of these that you can look at. And you can see here, we can search for specific colors in the background and where those have been used. And we can look at all sorts of images and the colors that he used to make these. And these are actually game images. He uses these for video games, for JavaScript video games. But I thought these were really cool. And yeah, and so that's kind of it. I didn't expect that to be that short. I figured it would be about a half an hour. But again, this has changed a lot because I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people over the last 2 days. So I thought I would include just the stuff that everybody seemed more interested in. But does anybody have any questions that I can answer? You can spend a little bit of time.
I would have two.
Okay.
One is basically about security, because you use in the first part of the slides purely CSS.
Right.
And you had a sentence about SVG versus CSS. And SVG, if anyone wants to allow end users or even just administrators to be able to upload SVGs, they just open lots of things for vulnerabilities.
Right.
What happens with CSS? Do you know something that can be similarly vulnerable, just like in a script format from SVG? Any idea about how CSS can be vulnerable?
So CSS, the thing about CSS is that it's not an executable language. It's not doing anything. Once it's on the screen, once it's on the page, it really just kind of sits there and shows you what's going on. All of the animations, all of the transitions, those things happen in the browser. The browser's the one that's telling the site how to do those things with those rules. And the only time that there's any kind of compilation going on, the only time that there's any real movement to CSS is when it's being compiled. So if you use less or SAS or something like that, and a tool like Gulp or Grunt to compile those things, there are some security issues that you have to deal with Grunt and Gulp. But by and large, most companies that use those tools know how to protect them. Also, a lot of them come from Node, and Node is generally pretty good about security. They sometimes not, and when they're not, it's big news and everybody hears about it. But Node's usually pretty good about security, especially when we're talking about the really basic tools that everybody uses. Plus, a company like ours at MediaCurrent, we've got security people, we've got DevOps people, and we use these tools all the time. So we know better than to let bad people do bad things with our compilers. But yeah, CSS is much safer because it's not doing anything that reaches out, and you can't reach in and do anything with it. So
yeah. The other one is when there are animations on a website. So let's say Drupal.org on the front page. We got an animation that is, I guess, by default disabled because it's not made by Canvas or something like that. But those are usually videos that can be disabled. The thing is, and my question turns here to accessibility. So people might go with mental issues if something like blows the things out of the screen. So how we can pause these things on Canvas or by CSS automation? Is there a way to make it more accessible?
A lot of the tools that are used, a lot of the accessibility tools, for example, if you have a user and you've got a screen reader that is speaking what's on the page to them, You can use ARIA labels to hide the animations so that they don't, so that the screen reader doesn't run across them. And screen readers also, they're really looking at the content. It would never occur to a screen reader to say that there's a bird moving its way across the screen, because it's not actually happening. It's just happening in the background. So these things, they don't affect the content. So for most accessibility issues, that's not a problem. But if you turn off animations, these will stop. Because the keyframes, like I said, it's really just a different way to use animations and transitions. And you can go into the settings in your browser and turn those things off.
Right.
So if, a lot of people who, somebody that would respond to the flashing or just would not respond well to an animation, generally would probably know to turn those things off in the browser.
So those can be turned off.
Yeah, they can be turned off. You can turn off animations and stuff like that in your browser. Just like you can turn off, videos. You can make it so videos don't ever play. I think advertisers are always trying to find ways around that. And I think browsers are always trying to find ways around their ways around that. I think as far as accessibility goes, that's a conversation that we're going to have to keep having for as long as we're, trying to make things more interactive, more animated on the web. We're going to have to talk about better ways to do that. But at this point, ARIA is probably your best tool to take care of that kind of thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever heard of P5JS?
P5JS, that's the charts one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we used it a lot when I was going to school because we actually did a lot of interactive art. And it's really fun to use. I don't know if it can be used in production, but it's a really cool library that you can do a lot of cool stuff with, and it's at least fun to play with it.
Yeah, see, and that's, again, I don't know if it's a thing that you would use in production. I mean, how is something like that going to be useful to a production site? I mean, honestly, this is a screenshot that I took. So, and given that the only thing that moves is the little airplanes, this is what we would put in production, is this image. To build it in HTML and CSS has almost no production value at all. But that's, again, not the point. The point is that you can and you should do these things because you can. And I think one of the things that really made me want to do this was watching developers who see this thing, and the first question that they always ask me is, okay, but why would you do that? Well, why wouldn't you?
I can see one use case for that where rather than using images, if you could produce this where it's lighter weight to be downloaded, then in restricted bandwidth scenarios, like you're trying to minimize the page weight or anything like that.
That's a good point. Yeah, and I bet you it would make it a whole lot easier to turn something like this into something that would work and look just as good on a phone as it would on a tablet or a laptop or a great big desktop. And as those things, as we're looking at smaller and smaller screens, and bigger screens, having the kind of control over it that you would not have over an image could definitely be a good way to do that. This one is one of my favorites because when I came across this, I spent like an hour looking at the source code for this thing. Each of the legs is a div, and each of the drawers is a div, and each of the drawer pulls is a div with a box shadow. And I mean, it's just the detail involved in drawing something like this onto a screen has got to be phenomenal, and it's absolutely amazing. And I really like the little airplane.
So this kind of reminds me a little bit of like the whole as we're adults, we're not supposed to have as much fun. We're not taking recess anymore, any of that that type of stuff.
Right.
Is there any lessons to learn or things to bring back and saying there's a reason why it's good for us to be able to have freedom to experiment. There's a reason why it's good for us to not always come up with the most efficient solution, but to be able to still be inspired by the work, as
Absolutely. Well, if you think about it, what we're talking about doing here is playing with it. And we know that humans are not the only ones that play. All animals play, all baby animals play, all baby humans play, adults play. And the reason that we play is to learn. The reason that, lion cubs tumble around is because they're learning to fight, they're learning to hunt. The reason that we play is because we're learning spatial relations. We babble because we're learning to talk, and when somebody babbles back at us and they smile, we realize that that's a good thing, so we babble some more. And play is how we learn. It's how we become creative, it's how we become interested, and it's how we practice what we're doing. Because, just because you would not ever necessarily sit down and take the time to do something like Francine, it doesn't mean that if you did, you would not get much, much better as a professional at using CSS, at understanding HTML elements and HTML5. I mean, just the amount of time and creativity and thought that goes into building CSS art, into building those beautiful JS canvas animations, they're practice, if nothing else. And there are ways for you to, like I said, the little spinny one, not that one, this one. That's not what I intended for that to do. That was a mistake. But that's still, look at that, that is so cool. I love that. And, and that's, so I figured out how to do something else. The way moving that around behind and then in front, that is the kind of thing that we might put in a production site, to have it, noticeably 3D like that when it's really not. So the way that the shadows work, the way that the colors work, those things are things that I might put in a production site. I can't imagine what you would do with this in a production site except put it up and have your users look at it and be like, okay, that's really cool. But, the time that it took for me to do that taught me, the spatial relations of putting together a div like that. So that's a skill that I have now. That's a little piece of knowledge that I have now that I didn't before. And I've been doing this for 7 years. And I've never gotten anything to look that good in 3D on a screen.
I would argue there's just as much case for innovation and experimentation, because that's what pushes things forward.
Yeah.
So so many times R&D projects, like research and development projects, they don't really have a practical application. A lot of work in academia there's not like a concrete business purpose for it. It's experimentation to see what can be done. And that's how we define the building blocks and push it so that we can build on top of that even further.
Yeah, and then what can we do with that? I mean, let's be honest. Everybody who learns to code at one point wrote the words "Hello World" onto a screen. And that little bit, just getting the words "Hello World" to print to a screen, that's not going to make you a professional. You're not going to do anything with that. But that step, that moment when you watch your screen light up and respond to you, that kicks off the dopamine in your brain, and you think, oh, I really like that, and then you want to do another one. And that's the other thing that I think that this does, is it reminds us why we started doing this in the first place. Because like I was saying before, nobody came into this business thinking that I, as a professional, want to spend my life putting colors and buttons and roundy corners on divs. That's not, that's not why we started doing this. Everybody started doing this because it was interesting, because it was cool, because they could do something now that they could not do before, and look what I can do. And that's why all of us started doing this. And then we get to this point where, to become a senior developer, like Zack said, senior developers write less code. That might be true, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life writing less code. I don't want to spend the rest of my life putting roundy corners on things. I want to do stuff like this. And, I realize that I'm going to go sit back down at 8 a.m. Monday morning and, start putting together the hero image for the landing page for the client that I'm on right now. And it's not going to do anything like this. But the first time that I wrote a Hello World script, that was the beginning of the thing that I'm doing for the client, that my company is charging, what, $185 an hour for my time or something? You know, some exorbitant amount of money that, you know, and that's where it all started, was doing stuff like this. And it's because I want to do this that I can do that.
I just have a cool resource to share that I know of.
Absolutely.
It's in the browser if you want to go to it.
Yeah.
It is a.singlediv.com. And this apparently was made by Lynn Fisher, and everything that you see here is made with one div. And it's a long page. You can scroll down and see plenty more.
Oh, wow. That's very cool.
And I think one of the biggest tricks, and I made that one there, the maze thing on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest tricks that I learned, again, you know, with experimentation, is that this is possible by using a background gradient and using many background gradients on a single div to create these kind of shapes and whatnot. And it gets even more extravagant as you go down. There's like a conveyor belt one.
Oh, wow, these are really
incredibly
cool.
insane. But this is just worth a share. You know, I think you can check out the source code. This is a pretty good little CSS learning resource.
Oh, and it shrinks
And
correctly.
then I want you to see this conveyor belt one too, because it's pretty mind blowing.
Oh, wow.
And that's a single div.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah, when I was putting together this this presentation, oh, those are neat. Those are cute. I like her.
That was shared with me a few months ago, and I thought it was pretty cool.
But I have this entire. This Toby. Don't look at Toby. I was like, this one. That's just a CSS bird. That I thought was really interesting. And then I was trying to find, where's my squirrel? I didn't do this one. It's a little CSS squirrel. And I was trying, my coworkers call me the code squirrel, so I was trying to find a place to, because I do stuff like this. So I was trying to find a place to use this, this little squirrel. But yeah, again, it's just, you know, it's all fairly simple. But anybody else?
And if no more questions come up, I'd be interested to see, like, what are some of the benefits you get from SAS? Like, what do you showed us compile code.
Mm-hmm.
What are some handy things in SAS that make that simpler?
Well, so SAS by and large is really just a simple way to write CSS, and I think that it does make transitions and animations easier, just because, first of all, it's a whole lot easier to see when you have, for example, opening and closing transitions, and then you can just write those in and just, add the classes with the ampersands. The nesting really makes pulling these kinds of divs and their styles together easier to understand. So I mean, like with this one, he's got the head, and so you can nest, and you can see here the way they have those nested. This is the HTML that goes with this, and he's using Pug, which is a really weird tool, by the way. I wouldn't recommend it. But here you can see this is the SAS, and he's got the left side of the head, the right side of the head, the ear, the inner ear is inside the ear, the eye, and so these things, instead of having to say head dot left and then those styles, head dot right and then those styles, head dot ear, head dot eye, it's really easy to start losing track of those, especially when you start using. For example, media current, our standard is to use BEM, and we personally don't use the nesting nomenclatures where you just use the ampersand to follow a BEM rule out to the bottom, because we prefer to make it easier to search the files, working on the principle that just because you can doesn't mean you should. But using BEM and SCSS and nesting those things together makes it a whole lot easier to find them. Also, SCSS provides you with mixins and formulas, and And that, I think, is where the real power comes from. Because not only do mixins make it easier to pass around, for example, a container div that's got the margins and the padding that's going to show up everywhere. You can just pass that stuff in. You can pass in animations. We do a lot of animations with mixins and formulas because you just have to write the keyframes once and then you can pass them into a file a billion times. So those are really great, and they're a lot of fun to play with too. The mixins and the formulas, especially the formulas, because those are a really great way to do animations. They're also a really fun way to do layouts. You can use the formulas to, for example, if we're looking at a phone, we do it this way, and we use this many divs and we use this many colors. It's really the last really cool formula that I actually wrote was for a gradient, because we got a design from a client who was obviously not a web designer, that wanted to use the golden ratio to change the color behind the hero, starting at black and moving into their branded green. And it's lovely, but it took me almost all day just to get that to look the way that it was supposed to. And I knew for a fact that if it wasn't perfect, they'd send it back because they do that. So, so I used a SAS formula to use the golden ratio to step through all of the colors between black and their branded green, and then I didn't have to stand there and write, the linear gradient to 30 at this color, the linear gradient to 28.5 at this color, the linear gradient at 28 to this color. I didn't have to sit there and do that. I built a formula that I could just tell it, I want to start here and I want to end here. And now it works. And I sent that to the client this week, and hopefully it'll come back well.
Now you're prepared if they come back and ask, like, well, that started too far apart.
Yeah,
Let's go with
can
this
we add a new, so now all I really have to do is go in and update the formula, and I don't have to go in and update, all of the lines of linear gradient to slide back up, because if they're not happy with the green at the bottom of the div, then I have to change all of the percentages all the way up the gradient. But with the formula, I can just change that one and change the steps on the percentages, and it'll fix it for me. But again, I think that's one of the keyframes, formulas, mixing, stuff like that. I think it's stuff that a lot of developers don't use enough of because they don't realize what it can do because they've never just played with it. That's how we learn. That's what we do. We play with stuff. So that's, and I think, creating art out of it is the best way to play with it because it's pretty and it gives you that quick shot of dopamine, that beautiful thing, so. Anything else? Anybody? Okay. Well, thank you very much.